And I know exactly what you're saying to yourself right now.
I'm seeing double here. 4 crusties.
Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Soviet IS-7 heavy tank. The model in this video is built for private commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in these build videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35th scale to 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. This model here is built predominantly out of the box, however I did went ahead and deviate from the kit components by adding several aftermarket upgrades. In this video we're going to be going over the base starter kit, the aftermarket upgrades, as well as other areas of the model to watch out for. Stay tuned because there's going to be a bit of info and cool content coming right at you. To kick this video off, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this here is the Soviet Object 260 heavy tank prototype, or also popularly known as the Joseph Stalin 7 or the IS-7. Whichever way you cut it, this vehicle was a very interesting vehicle that was developed by the Soviet Union at the very end of World War II. The vehicle itself was again designed in 1945, so just right at the tail end of the war. At the time, the Soviet heavy tanks that were being fielded were the IS-2 and soon to be coming off the production line, the IS-3. However, there was still plenty of research and development being done throughout the duration, and one of those designs was this vehicle over here. All of the Russian designs that were on the drawing board at the time were obviously being designed to deal with the German anti-tank weaponry and vehicles that were being fielded at the period being used against them. And one of the vehicles that the Germans had that was very powerful was the Jagdtiger. That was a vehicle that was armed with probably one of the most powerful anti-tank weaponry during the period, and the IS-7 here was designed specifically in mind to be able to handle and duke it out with one of those vehicles. And the end result of all this design work was the IS-7, which was going to be a very impressive and a very formidable opponent to encounter on the battlefield. The design was going to be very similar to what we saw on the Joseph Stalin 3, which is not too surprising, and it was just going to take that design though, but run with many of its characteristics. For instance, the hull. The vehicle uses a similar type of hull design where it's severe angular plates that'll accumulate into the pike nose, and the vehicle is going to be extremely heavily armored, where apparently it's said to be at its thickest point to be 110 millimeters thick. The vehicle was going to weigh in at 68 tons, which, to put things in perspective, weighs basically on the same level as a King Tiger. Apparently, the designers were able to make do on their promise because during testing, the vehicle was able to shrug off hits from a Jagdtiger's 12.8 centimeter Pak 44 from as close as about half a mile away, which, again, is actually quite impressive. Even though the vehicle was extremely heavily armored, that doesn't mean it was slow. The vehicle was actually quite nimble and fast for the size that it is. The vehicle had an M50T V12 diesel engine and was able to hit max speeds of 37 miles an hour. As impressive as the armor protection is, the vehicle's armament was also equally as impressive. For the main armament, the vehicle utilized a 130 millimeter S-70 main ordnance, and this was a very powerful weapon that can easily knock out most of any of the tanks that were again being fielded at the time and even on the drawing board from not just the Germans but even on the West. The vehicle was also very interesting in that it was going to incorporate, this is something that was brand new technology of the period, an autoloader. This was one of the first production vehicles to actually incorporate an auto-loading system, which is something that the Soviets wouldn't forget and would carry into the other future tank designs that were going to be coming down the road in the 60s and the 70s. In order to house this ordnance inside the vehicle did utilize a low-profile all-steel cast turret similar to the Joseph Stalin 3. However, because of all the equipment, the turret was elongated in its shape as opposed to the perfect circle that's found on the JS-3 counterpart. However, the ordnance doesn't end there, because whoever designed this thing was obviously a gun nut, because this thing was armed with a ton of MGs. First being two 14.5mm KPVT MGs, one in the coax and the other mounted on the top for AA use. It also mounted 2 SG-43s mounted forward in the hull, 2 more SG-43s mounted in the turret, pointed to the rear, and then 2 other SG-43s mounted coaxial on the mantlet. After design was finalized, 6 prototypes were assembled and sent to testing and evaluation. And after the testing was done, it came back that the vehicle was extremely impressive and had a lot of very innovative and futuristic features. However, it was just too expensive and overly complex to produce, and all of the situations and the type of tactics that the Red Army would utilize this vehicle for, all of this can be done with a more simpler tank design, being the T-10. And because of that, the IS-7 just went ahead and faded into obscurity. Currently, there's one example that's known to survive. It's in the Kubinka Tank Museum, and it's one of their very cherished gems. Before we go any further with the video, let's go ahead and take a step back to when this model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this 1/35 scale plastic Trumpeter Soviet JS-7 heavy tank kit, plus several aftermarket accessories. But we'll touch upon this as the video continues. Unlike the other IS-7 build, where that one was in the stash for many years, until finally I was able to get to it, this one here is the polar opposite and is literally fresh from the sampan. Obviously, this one being built for commission kind of gets priority over some of the other builds, as commission builds always do in the shop. But anyway, so this one here is fresh from the vendor, so there's no dust going to be sitting here on the surface. The model here was procured off of eBay, and these things are still extremely commonly found. Trumpeter has some very good distribution, and a large number of these kits were produced. Because of that, tracking one down is pretty easily done, specifically online. However, if your hobby shop is a really good one and does stock Trumpeter kits, this kit here shouldn't be that hard to come by. The price on these kits are also pretty reasonable. You can pick the base starter kit up anywhere between $40 to $60 US, give or take, of course, depending on the vendor and other things factored in like shipping and things along those lines. But realistically, these things are on average with the other plastic tank kits that are on the market. Normally at this time here, I'll go over the kit's history as well as its backstory. However, since I did that in far greater depth in the previous video, there's no point rethreading old ground. But since you are here, I might as well just state the basics. So this kit here was originally produced by Trumpeter back in the year 2013 or 2014, around there. More than likely, this kit was produced during that time because at that time, there was this great fervor and interest in weird prototype single production type tanks, and this more than likely coincides with the video games like World of Tanks or War Thunder at the time that produced this vehicle as an in-game playable tank, so it was some good synergy going on. And again, it's great to have something unique on the market, and this kit here was greatly appreciated because this is again one of those vehicles where if you wanted one for the longest period of time, you were just going to have to scratch build it, and there was just nothing on the market to satisfy that itch. So this kit here, being a wide distribution, full production type kit, was definitely something that was going to be greatly appreciated by the armor hobby. Even though this kit here was produced back in 2013 or so, the copyright on the box is dated for 2019, and this is something that I've seen on lots of other Trumpeter kits. They have older tooling models that are still in production. However, at some point in time, they change some verbiage or something, and that coincides with an update on the copyright. But rest assured, the kit's tooling is a bit older than that. Not that it's important, because the kit's tooling is actually quite good, even though at this point now it's over 10 years old. Anyway, the kit also is produced, or I should say is released in 2 other type of formats. There's another version that is out there that contains some extra fittings, such as replacement track links, as well as also a replacement barrel, both of which are good ideas. In fact, I'm going to be adding those to this build over here. However, I'm yet to see one of those releases out there, but that is a thing, and if you come across one, it will save you some time with buying some extra aftermarket parts because it already supplies them with the kit. As for the kit itself, it's all injection molded polystyrene with, I believe, some photo etch, if I'm not mistaken. A little hazy since I worked on the other one. Nope, yep, it does contain a little fret of photo etch, but outside that, it's your standard plain Jane injection molded plastic model. Enough with that, let's go ahead and briefly go over the box art and graphic design. So just like with the other example, same exact box art, just a nice little illustration of the IS-7 driving through a winter field, probably going through its trials. The composition is very good. It's the same illustrator that Trumpeter uses on many of their box arts. Matter of fact, you can see his signature right over there. And the individual is a very talented box art artist. Outside of that, same type of graphic design that we see on many other Trumpeter kits of the modern era, where we have these blue banners over here. We have the Trumpeter logo right there. And as for the font, it's this typical sans serif typeface that we see on all of the Trumpeter kits. Remainder of the graphic design is quite typically is what we see. We have here a nice little thumbnail of the vehicle. Some corporate info, nice little brief history of the vehicle in question. On the reverse side, similar type info. This is kit's rated for 14 plus, so I should be more than adequate at putting this one together. And on the side tab here, this is the basic layout, quite common what we see on model kits. And by the way, for those who are interested, this is kit number 05586. All right, no more further diddle-daddling. Let's go ahead and crack the box open. So again, I'm going to briefly go over the runners over here. I already did that in more depth in the other video. But as you can see, everything is molded in the standard gray polystyrene. The kit quality is excellent. The finish on the parts are nice. There's no real flash or anything to worry about. And the kit is excellent quality. Of course, this is made with modern injection molding technology. So the kit's going to be up there with many of the other kits from the same era and even to today. Pretty much, you will use everything out of the box on this one. It's not like many other kits out there that have several options or you have some spare parts left on hand. This one here, essentially, you're going to use what's on the sprues. Unless you replace one or two parts like I will, which I'll go over in a moment. One thing that's really cool on this kit is the shape of the hull. The IS-7 has this very strange boat-like shape to it, which again was done for ballistics, and this was a carryover from all the other JS tanks that came before in the family. Very good detailing on these parts. Everything, of course, is hermetically sealed, which is again what we customarily see on these models. Here's the bottom portion of the turret. One thing about this kit is that it does not have any locks on the turret. This is something that we do see on a lot of Trumpeter kits for one reason or another. Sometimes they have turret locks, sometimes they don't. This one does not. We also have here a fret of clear plastic parts. These are used for periscopes and headlights, which is a fantastic bit of equipment. This is something that, again, we come to expect on modern era kits. And this one here is definitely no exception, and it always looks very good once properly assembled. A lot of MGs. The one thing I remember from the last build are the brush guards. It gives you this very fiddly molded brush guard setup. It looks like it's something that can easily break, and it can if you're not careful. But if you play your cards right and if the planets line up, this will yield for a beautiful bit of equipment once fit and placed onto the vehicle. I'll talk about this later. All right, continuing further takes us to the suspension. Again, everything is exactly where it needs to be. I think with the way the kit's laid out, you may have one or two swing arms left, if my memory serves. That's sometimes the thing you'll see on these kits, just with the way the suspension runners are laid out. But needless to say, everything I remember goes together quite nicely. Here we got the sprockets, the idlers, final drives, and other bits of equipment. Everything is nicely molded. It's the same quality moldings that we see on the other parts. The rear fuel cans are a single piece assembly, which I like. No two-face, or I should say two-component assembly, which means no seams to deal with, and that's always something that's great. Whenever you don't have to deal with seams, it's always a very pleasant day. On this side over here, we have the final drives. Yes, there's my cat in the background that loves to be hogging all the limelight. But anyway, you get to see the final drives right there, the fasteners, and with the sprocket. Detailing, again, nice and crisp, something that we would expect for a modern kit quality. Get your foot out of here. Shoot. All right. Okay. Here's the turret over here. Again, single molding. The turret does have some cast texturing molded on. The cast texturing is very subtle, but it's in scale, and it does look very nice, and it actually holds paint quite well. And really nothing much more needs to be said about that. Oh, I love that little blower right there on the top. Very distinctive bit of detailing on this vehicle, and it's executed quite nicely here on the Trumpeter example. On the box here, we have a decal sheet, modern printed water slide decals. I've had excellent results with these on past builds, so this one here I'm not expecting any different. Also supplied with the kit is a nicely added set of metal components. The metal components consist of a fret here of photo etch, and what's nice about the PE is that it gives you the pieces for grill covers, and this is a excellent bit of equipment that's supplied stock with the kit on many models out there. This is something that you would have to procure as a aftermarket accessory. However, with the kit here, that's not the case. You can just roll with it out of the box and have some beautiful mesh covers for your build. In addition to the mesh covers, you also have other bits of equipment, such as fender supports, as well as some other gizmos for periscopes, if I'm not mistaken, or other things here or there. From what I recall from the other build, these pieces assemble very, very well and are an excellent addition to add to the model. However, the caveat is you only have enough for one model, so you want to be careful, make sure nothing goes off the lost part yet, because if it does, well, now your life is going to be a bit more complicated. On the opposite side, we also have a nice little length here of copper cabling, and this is something that, again, is a nice feature that's added. On a lot of kits out there, usually you get a piece of nylon string for this. However, for this one here, they give it to you in a flexible piece of copper. The copper cable is a nice accessory because it's very flexible, and unlike the string, it holds its shape, so you get to model it in the position that you want it, and once it's locked in, it tends to stay where it needs to be. On the very bottom of the box here, we have a nice little colored insert, nice little illustrations of the vehicle in question. This is something that's really nice as a painter's aid, but it's even better that you could frame it and hang it into your workshop, and it makes for a nice little display piece. This is something that Trumpeter does do quite often on their builds, and it's one that I greatly appreciate. Another thing on the bottom of the box, of course, is the instruction manual. And if anyone's ever built any of the other Trumpeter kits in the past, what you see is exactly what you get. The Trumpeter instructions are very nice, they're very well and thoroughly laid out, and from what I remember on the other one, I didn't run into any issues with parts being mislabeled or anything along those lines. So basically, what you see here is going to help you with your build immensely. And that takes us to the last accessory, and this is something that is a major ding on the kit, specifically in my opinion, but it's also proven fact, are the Caterpillar tracks. So the biggest ding on this kit is that the tracks are individual link in length. As you know, I can't stand these. I'm not going to review them. That's exactly what I think of them. In their place, I'm going to be replacing them with a beautiful set of aftermarket workable tracks, just like I did on the other build. Only on the other build, I used a workable track link set from Master Club, if I'm not mistaken, but either way, for this build over here, I'm using another brand of metal track links. Unfortunately, they are not labeled in any way, shape, or form, but these things here were procured off of eBay, and they came in the two little bags that we have here. So we have one baggie here that contains the actual metal track links themselves, and we have another baggie over here that contains the metal pins, and the pins are nice little brass pre-cut pieces, which is fantastic, and it's definitely something that's going to make the construction go by a bit easier. Also, as I often mention these type of videos, accompanying this video over here, I'm going to have another video dedicated to a track link review and tutorial, where I'm going to go over the review of the tracks themselves, as well as also a brief tutorial on how to put them together and add them to the model. I did that with the Master Club ones, and this one here is a nice little addition because there are two options on the market. The Master Club links were excellent. However, they've become a little bit harder to find in recent years. So with this set here on the market, it kind of picks up the slack. So it's going to be interesting to see how the two square off. But outside of that, that's definitely something to look forward to. Again, that video will probably be posted after this one makes its debut. Another bit of equipment that was procured off of eBay to assist this build is a metal armament. The armament over here is another aftermarket accessory. The other one, I believe, was from Voyager, if I'm not mistaken. But this one here is from a different maker called Shinyu, I guess? I don't know. Either way, this company, I've actually used a few of their metal accessories. Oh, you again. I've used several of their metal accessories on other builds in the past, and I've had excellent results with them. This one here, I'm not expecting anything different. As for the piece itself, it's very similar in fabrication materials compared to the other one, where we have the main length itself made out of CNC aluminum, and we have a muzzle brake over here that is made out of CNC brass. It is a two-piece assembly. Hopefully it comes into focus, but the piece is also pre-drilled out which is something that is not exactly done here on the stock tooling, where we have, the piece is nice and hollow. It's a single molding. However, if you look at the holes here, they aren't just integrally molded solid. This is something that you would have to address with a pin vise. You could drill them out if desired, but since the customer requests to have the tank built exactly like the last one I did, I went ahead and also swapped out the barrel section because, again, the same reasons. Either way, this is a nice bit of equipment and will definitely make the build look a lot better in the end. It also makes it a little bit easier because you don't have to do any seam work, which is something you do have to do on the kit ones. The other thing that this set does have that's a little different from the last one are some rounds. So that's something that's pretty cool. It's a nice little gesture, CNC brass pieces. Generally, they're useless for these type of builds because they're not in diorama setting. However, I'll more than likely paint them for the individual just as a little extra bit of accessory to have with his model. And that's all there is to it. So, time to cut to the shop where I don't have any cats running around and I can go ahead and actually get this thing started. While the build is going on, of course, I mentioned that the stock main barrel is going to be replaced with an aftermarket one. The aftermarket barrel is a really good quality. However, one improvement that I am going to make is to drill out the muzzle section. If we see over here, the piece is just squared off solid material, and this would definitely be a bit improved if I go ahead and drill it out. To drill this out, I'm going to use the lathe, and this is one procedure where you have to have the lathe. If you don't have a lathe, this is definitely not going to be something that you should undertake. Something like this has to be done absolutely perfectly, and trying to do it freehand is just not going to work for you. The lathe is definitely the de facto way to do it. For the bit I'm going to use is a 9/64 drill bit right over here. I'm going to throw that into the chuck here on the tailstock, and then I'm just going to go ahead and drill the piece out. Alright, so the bit is in the chuck, the tailstock is at the right location, and the barrel is grasped onto the headstock over here. The only thing I'm going to do is add a little drop of oil here to the bit just to make sure that the piece can cut cleanly. Aside from that, for depth, I'm not going that deep. I only need to go in about maybe 4 or 5 millimeters, if that. So an inch, that would be about 1/4 of an inch or so. You don't need to go that far. And remember, there is a muzzle brake on the end, so it's not going to be that visible. But about 1/4 of an inch should be more than suffice to get the desired look. And that's all there is to it. The procedure goes by very quickly, specifically, of course, if you have the lathe. Also, if you have a sharp drill bit, this too will really speed up the process. If you're using a dull bit, it's just going to cause the litany of problems. For the depth, I went actually a little bit deeper compared to what I mentioned before, being 1/4 of an inch. This is about 1/2 an inch deep, so either way, the job was still a complete success. Let me go ahead and pull this thing out so we get to see what it looks like now that it has a hole drilled out in the muzzle section. Perfect. Because I went ahead and used oil for a lubricant, I want to go ahead and clean that area off just to prevent any sort of problems either with the glue adhesion from the muzzle brake. Also, when the model gets painted, you really don't want to have any sort of oil on the surface. Obviously, it can lead to issues. And with that all wiped off, it's now time to just mount on the muzzle brake. The muzzle brake is a 2-piece assembly. Here's the brake that I went ahead and assembled off camera. Like I said before, it's a 2-piece assembly. We have the main drum and the top portion, and the piece just plugs directly on without any sort of fit issues. Also, on that note, there was really no burrs to contend with. The piece was actually pretty well machined from the get-go. The only thing that I did was on the surface here before I went ahead and glued the top, I just lightly went over the area with some fine sandpaper just to add a little bit of abrasion to the surface so that it would help the glues adhere in a much stronger manner. And once the piece was aligned, or I should say dropped in place, the alignment is really the only thing you have to pay attention to. It does fit pretty well, but again, you'll be surprised on how many times you could be off slightly with the alignment. Once the glues were set, I went ahead and just polished the sections down with some fine sandpaper, and the piece is now ready for installation. To do that, I'm just going to add a little drop of glue over here to the inner portion here of the brake itself. The reason why I add the glue here and not to the stem is that when you slide the piece in, the glue is going to have a habit on pushing outward, and it's going to leave a mark on the rear portion of the barrel section. But if I add the glue to this section over here, when I push the piece in, it's going to goop up forward, and it's not really going to be in a visible location. The piece just plugs on. The tolerances are very tight. There's no key and groove type system. It literally just plugs in exactly where it needs to go. And this now comes to the point of installation onto the model. So, also like with the muzzle brake, there is no key and groove system here on the rear section of the barrel. And this is important because you do have some alignment here that needs to be squared off. Namely, if you look at the rear portion here of the muzzle brake, it is not symmetrical. It's not a round circle or a disc or anything like that. It actually has like a tombstone shape to it. And because of that, the alignment is going to be paramount. Otherwise, the piece is going to be canted and it's going to throw off the look of the model. On the kit originally, there is a key and groove system right over here, and there's a notch, or a corresponding notch, on the kit supplied plastic barrel. So the piece just plugs in the correct format. However, when you're doing with this type of a system, you are going to have to amputate that little notch right over there, or else the piece is just not going to fit in properly. To remove the notch, I'm just using my X-Acto over here. You can use a Dremel, but it's a little bit overkill. However, the procedure will still work regardless. What I do is I just do a 2-incision type cut. I take the blade and I push inward, and then I just put an incision downward and the piece is removed. This is somewhat risky. You have to be careful that you don't put over pressure, and next thing you know, you have some way bigger problems ahead of you. Again, you want to make sure the piece is completely deburred, because obviously if there's a little crumb of plastic in there, it's just going to inhibit the tube from being inserted fully. But if you go ahead and properly take care of it, as you see, the piece fits on very nicely. It is a pretty snug fit, which is fantastic. Even though the stem here is a bit on the shorter side, it still fits into this section here quite well, and for the most part should be able to work out of the box. On some builds, I've had to add extenders to the barrel itself, but I don't see that being necessary on this one per se. But again, we'll see how that cookie crumbles, but so far it doesn't seem like that's going to be necessary. Well, on second thought, upon further consideration, I decided to go ahead and actually add an extender to this piece over here just to make it that much stronger. Although the piece is pretty strong from the box, because this thing does have to be shipped to the customer, I'm going to err more on the side of rigidity and strength as opposed to just rolling with the kit configuration. So this is something that's an elected procedure. You don't have to do it, but it's one of those that does make you feel a little bit better. So to do so, again, I got the barrel back into the lathe. Even with the muzzle brake installed, it still fits into my headstock without any problems. And in the tailstock chuck over here, I have a 3/32 drill bit. Very, very common drill bits all over the place, specifically in the US. Can't speak for you guys out there in Europe. Either way, I have here a little 3/32 aluminum rod over here, just some scrap that was lying around, but it seems to be the perfect size for the corresponding hole found on the Trumpeter tooling. So that's very advantageous. For the drilling, I'm going to go a little bit deeper than the last one. I'm going to go at minimum a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, because I really want to get as much meat as possible around the shaft over here, because that will definitely add to the strength, and you want rigidity. That's the whole point why I'm doing this. So I'm just going to add a little drop of oil right there again, and let's go ahead and make some chips. But one thing I noticed before I do, there was a little burr from the machining process that was on this portion over here, and that was actually throwing off the bit to be center, and that is a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and file down the burr over here. That should give me a nice flat surface, and then the bit should be able to go in there. Some machinists will say I need to do a pilot hole or a center hole. That is true. I do not have a center drill, though that's small enough for this. So that's why I'm just going to try to use just a standard drill bit. Okay, so that seems to be nice and true. Let's go ahead and get the tailstock back in here. There's already oil on the bit, so I don't need to go ahead and relube it. And let's just go ahead and start drilling. Perfect. Okay, I'm a little over a ½ inch, which is exactly what I want. Take this little spaghetti off a bit here. All right, let's see how the barrel turned out. Perfect. Before I go ahead and glue this guy in place, though, I am going to go ahead and clean this section off with a little bit of paint thinner, just so, again, to make sure there's no oil on the surface. As you can see, the pin just slips into place over here. The fit is quite snug, which is perfect. And from here, I'm just going to go ahead and drop it onto the model. But before I do, let's just do one more test fit. And there we go. See the stem overhanging on the inside here? That's going to be a perfect location for the glues to bind and really keep this thing where it needs to go. I mean, so much so, look, it's not even glued in yet, and the piece is nice and firm, and it isn't going anywhere. So the glues are just going to go ahead and just solidify it all that much more. And that's it. After some careful alignment, I cannot stress that enough, the piece is now glued in place. And hopefully it comes out on camera, but you can see how the squared edge over here is perfectly straight with the bottom portion of the turret. And the barrel is as true as, well, it's ever going to be. As for alignment, this was done purely by eyeballing it, but I carefully just basically did almost like a rifle barrel where you look at the center portion here of the turret and just use your eye to make sure that all of the angles and everything lines up. Pretty tricky to get on camera so that it focuses in, but that's literally how I did it. And I did one of those ones where I slipped the barrel and I look into the light on the ceiling and I could go ahead and adjust accordingly. Fast forwarding a little bit takes to the point right now where the model is fully assembled and is actually ready to head off into paint. The model does have some accessories that are not yet installed at this point because these are going to be painted off the model to ensure that they are thoroughly painted, as they tend to have nooks and crannies that paint has a hard time getting into these locations when fitted in place. Specifically, the extended fuel canisters on the back. With the way these components are, you tend to have trouble getting paint into these under sections over here, and it's definitely something that's a bit problematic. So it's best to, in my opinion, paint them off the model and then go ahead and drop them on as the painting starts winding down. Another thing that you'll see missing on the model at this time are the photo etch grills. Photo etch are the type of things I also like to, specifically grill work, paint off the build because of the habit on the grill work getting clogged up with paint and primer. It's something that can easily happen, and like I've stated before in several other videos, painting photo etch mesh is an art form in itself and does require some skill sets in order to go ahead and properly do it. You will see a lot of builds out there online where they just go ahead and try to paint everything on the model, and when they do, if you look closely, you will see some of the meshwork plugged up in many cases, and that's one thing you want to avoid because obviously it really does hurt the look of the build. One other thing that's currently omitted at this time is the periscope up here and the bow hatch. The reason why the bow hatch on this example is removed at the moment is because it allows me better access to go ahead and get in here with the clear components that need to be glued into the driver section. If I try to go ahead and install those with the hatch in place, it can still be done. That's how I did on the previous one, but I learned after doing that build, it's probably easier to do it without the hatch in the way because it allows me just a little bit more freedom of movement to get in there with my fingers. So that's why those are not yet installed at this time. Some people out there will say, well, John, can't you just go ahead and mask up the periscopes? The answer is yeah, but me personally, I just don't like doing that. I always have better luck with and more precision going ahead and painting them separately and then installing them as later down the road. Same thing is also true with the periscope up here. It's in this little box, and although the optic over here you can get full access to with your finger with putting the clear lens in, with the one up here that's not so much because this hole's smaller than the actual hole on the gap of the plastic itself. So you're not going to, once that box is in place, you're not going to be able to get access to this location anymore. So in my opinion, it's best to go ahead and assemble it off the model and then just paint and then do a final assembly at the tail end. On a similar note, that takes to the headlights, same exact thing. So we have the headlights right over here. The housings are installed. Lenses are going to be mounted after the model's painted. But on the IS-7 specifically, The brush guards are very unique, shall we say, and these are the type of things that you have to go ahead and install after the headlights are fit in place, because there's just no way in hell you're going to be able to get in here with that clear plastic headlight once these things are fitted in place. So on the IS-7, these guys here have to be painted off the model just so that you can install the headlights appropriately. As for the guards themselves, these are probably one of the more intricate components on the entire piece that you have to watch out for because of how frail everything is. It's nice that they are injection molded polystyrene. They do clean up very well, and they're also some nice scale thickness, but this comes at the expense of fragility. These things are ridiculously frail, and you've got to pay that in mind. Also, on these sections here and on the reverse side, there's this sacrificial bar that needs to be amputated out. And again, you have to really be on the ball to make sure you don't oversand or potentially damage any components. But if you play your cards right and use the right needle files and the right sandpaper, you should be able to navigate the waters quite nicely. If you notice, I went ahead and amputated this whole piece of runner off of the sprue. Again, this was done just so not only I could handle the piece during paint work, but also I could handle it during the polishing, because with the way those sprues designed, it kind of makes it difficult to get in there with the tools. So amputated off the sprue, and now you have full access. With the way it's molded onto these sections over here, it is somewhat convenient where it holds it pretty securely, and then which is great news, and then when it comes time for installation, just snip, 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 these pieces come off, and then I can carefully get them positioned in place. But again, more information on that is to come. We also have here, on a similar note, the top MG. This is a multi-piece assembly, so I went ahead and assembled to the position that we have here. The ammo can and the blink can is going to be painted off separately because those are different colors, and it's easier to do that when it's not glued on as opposed to when it's one solid piece. As for this piece here, you have to, again, make sure what part is MG and what part is not, and the cradle here is this section on the bottom, but with the sub-assembly we have it here, I can still get in here with a paintbrush and carefully paint it. A little less so if it's progressed past this point. Starting with the model's running gear, everything that you see here, with the exception of the track, are the kit supply components and were assembled out of the box and without any sort of problems. The kit's components are nicely engineered and they go together pretty well, so there's really not much more that you can want or expect out of these components over here. The only thing that I do want to mention, though, is that the rims on the vehicle are steel rimmed, so when you're weathering them, you want to make sure you go ahead and weather them accordingly. The wheels are very similar to like the type of wheels that we see on the German World War II tanks, like the King Tiger or the late production Tiger 1, but it's also similar to what we see on several Russian vehicles of the period, like the Joseph Stalin II, the 3, and even the KV. In order to paint the wheels, just a swipe of silver paint was utilized on just the rims. On the real vehicle, paint would not last on these sections for very long. After the vehicle is driven for a short period of time, that paint would quickly wear off, leaving for the bare metal exposed underneath. To apply the paint, it's basically done the exact same way that we do it on rubber tires, only instead of using a black or rubber black material, it's simply done with silver paint. Once the paint's applied to the rims, the wheels are then installed to the vehicle, thus completing the look. From the suspension takes us to the tracks. As I mentioned before, this model here was upgraded with a set of metal workable track links, and these here, of course, are going to be the subject matter of their own independent track link review and tutorial video, which will be posted shortly after this video here makes its debut. However, long story short, these tracks are awesome. They are probably some of the best workable track links I've ever come across, and if anyone's a fan of the channel, you'll know that I've built lots of workable track links over the years, and these ones here are definitely some of the best sets that I've ever built in terms of the quality, the manufacturing materials, and with the ease of assembly. These things tick all the boxes. They are sublime. The same was also true, by the way, for the Master Club links that I used on the other IS-7 build, but these ones here, in my opinion, are the same quality, if not just a little bit better compared to the Master Club links. Master Club ones are awesome, don't get me wrong, just these ones here just were, you know what, I'll just save that for the other video. Anyway, the tracks go together very, very quickly, within about like maybe 2 hours or so, if that. The tracks went from a pile of parts to in paint, so they go together really, really quickly. And on top of that, they are a perfect fit for this vehicle. If you look at the sprocket over here, you'll see that the tracks time absolutely swimmingly with the kit supply parts. No modifications or any other type of hand fitting needs to be done on the parts. The tracks, of course, since they are made out of metal, have a nice weight to them. They have a nice natural sag to them. They are really awesome. If you are working on one of these kits and you're trying to stick with the stock individual Lincoln length tracks, you are most certainly kidding yourself. Those tracks are just inhibiting the kit and are really preventing it from going to the next level. These workable track links are worth every single dime. If you're working on one of these Trumpeter IS-7s or you have one in the stash or contemplating on starting it, get one of these track link sets. You will most certainly thank me. Moving from the tracks takes us to the pike nose. The pike nose area, everything is again stock with this model. And again, the kit is just excellently rendered and excellently engineered in this regard. Starting with the toe cables here, the toe cables are the kit supplied metal ones. As I mentioned before, the flexible copper type material that the cables are made of are excellent because you can sculpt them and contour them in a way that makes them look very realistic. Several other kits out there that give you metal cable for the toe cables tend to be a bit too stiff and rigid, and just trying to get and bend them to shape is a bit problematic. Not with these ones over here. They just articulate extremely nicely, and once fitted in place, definitely do the job. For the eyelets over here, these are again, of course, the kit ones, and you can see I painted them with a slightly different color compared to the remainder of the base coat on the model. This is done just to give a little bit of extra color pop to the piece, as opposed to having it with the same color. Of course, you can do that. That's definitely not something that's out of the realm of reality, but again, it's just another way to enhance your building, just give it a little bit of extra personality. Departing from the front takes to the side detailing. Right here we have one of the convoy lights. The vehicle, being a Russian pattern tank, has 4 of these things. 2 on the front, 2 on the rear. And one thing that a lot of people out there forget to add to their build is the lens. The lens is this little dome right over there, and on the real unit it's white. So a little brush there of gloss light was added in order to get the look that you see here, and this was done to all 4 of the units on the model. Moving along, you can see all the Pioneer tools. These have been painted, weathered, and added to the appropriate locations. Tools are very nicely rendered out. I just have to carefully just paint everything to the way you see here. Some people out there, they like to go ahead and paint them when they're installed onto the model. Me personally, I like to do it where they are painted off the model because this gives you greater access to paint the handles and other things and make sure everything is painted thoroughly. You can, and I have painted handles while they are fitted in place. It is doable, but it takes a little bit more effort to do because of the potential of collateral damage if the paintbrush goes in a way that you don't anticipate, or if your paint is at the wrong consistency. So it is doable, but the margin of error is very, very limited compared to painting it off the model and installing it after the fact. Both roads will lead to Rome. Just, pick your poison. Me personally, I like doing it the after the fact method. Obviously, this was done to all of the tools on the vehicle, from the shovels that we saw on the opposite side to the large saw that we have here. Also, moving backward, you get to see the track jack right over there, the tensioner. And we have here the side-mounted MG. Of course, there's another one mounted on the opposite side of the model. And as I mentioned before, during the assembly, these 4 units, because there's 2 more on the turret, are a bit tricky to go ahead and glue together and do some seam removal on. And these are those things that are always in a snag-prone location. If you're handling an IS-7, this is a no-go zone, and you really have to watch out where you hold this thing, just picking it up, because these things just love to break off at the earliest convenience. And if they do, they're kind of difficult to glue back on. Fortunately, on this one here, the planets lined up extremely well, and knock on wood, I haven't broken one yet. So I'm going to count my blessings in that regard. Anyway, moving on back, you can see the other taillight right over there. And also, this brings us to the rear. And briefly, let me just mention the photo etch. The photo etch struts that are also found on the front are excellent. They go together extremely well, and because of the PE nature, the thickness of them, they give them all some very nice scale accuracy renditions in these areas. Also in this area, you get to see the exhaust manifolds. As I mentioned before, these are molded hollow and look fantastic with a little bit of weathering and exhaust soot added on them. Continuing rearward now brings us to the rear plate. Nothing much going on over here. Everything you see here is stock with the kit. The one thing I do want to mention, that the kit does have some functionality where the travel lock is fully functional, as you can see. It's a bit of a useless bit of detailing, admittedly, but hey, it's pretty cool that the piece actually can work. The rear fuel canisters, as we saw before, were painted off the model, and this was done in order to make sure that the area underneath is thoroughly painted, because something like this, again, it's one of those things where you can see it, but yet magically paint won't seem to get into those areas. So painting it off the model, then adding it after the fact, it's a great way to ensure that your bases are thoroughly covered. Moving topside takes to the engine deck, and here you get to see what it looks like with the photo etch grill work added in place. The photo etch grills are an excellent detail that are supplied with this model, and again, it's one of those things that just make this model just that nicely polished and engineered. There's something else to mention about the engine deck, where you do have internal fittings that need to be installed on the inside, and this needs to be done prior to the upper and lower hulls going together. If you are going to build one of these kits or considering building one of these kits, bear that in mind, because you can go through the motions and forget to install those pieces, and if you do, your life is a bit more complicated now. So just take care of that from the onset. Otherwise, the grill work I actually add again at the tail end of the build, just at the point where everything's basically finished. And the reason why I paint these off the model is because painting grill work, specifically photo etch grill work at 135, is a skill set in its own right. And it's very easy for these grills to get clogged. So your paint game needs to be 100% on point all throughout the construction. From primer to paint to weathering, all that good stuff. These grills just love to get clogged at the earliest convenience, and it's something that can always just be a detriment to your build. I've seen a lot of nice builds out there online, also on YouTube, where the build itself is essentially perfect, but there's a damn clogged section of PE, and that's always something that can hurt the look. So to prevent that, I always found it best to paint and weather everything off the model. Just gives me better control on the paint application, and it gives me the best chances possible for the PE to come out perfect. And as you can see here on this one, they did exactly just that. Once the PE is painted and the remainder of the model is ready for it, I just simply remove it off the fret and carefully just glue them to the appropriate locations, giving you the look that you see here. While on the topic of PE, brings us to the turret, and this is where there are some other fittings that are found on the kit that need to be added. The two smallest bits of PE that are found on the model and are the most intricate are the little latches that we have right here on these four sections of these top sections of ammo cans. And the sections are nicely rendered out on the PE fret, but are extremely frail, and you have to be careful. You want to hold your breath while doing it and make sure everything doesn't fly off the lost part of you, or even worse, it'll stick to the toothpick or your finger or whatever during installation. That's always a fun one. Fortunately, I didn't have that problem on this one over here, but it is something to bear in mind. Fortunately, one thing about the PE is that, as you can see, it looks excellent once fitted to the model, and once the panel line accent gets added, it goes into those areas, really highlighting them quite nicely. Also, while on this location, you get to see the rear cleaning staves fitted in place. These are the kit supply ones. You do have to make a modification to one of the pieces. It's recommended in the instructions, where you have to amputate a little piece off of it. And once that's done, you get the look that you see here. The one thing to mention about the parts is that the staves themselves are wooden rods, as they are on most other tanks out there, and the end connectors are typically brass on these units. So as a quick way to paint them, just a little swipe of gold paint was added to the appropriate locations, and this gives the completed look that you see here. It's very easy to just go ahead and paint all the rods just one color, and the end connectors aren't really molded into the piece. It's just a rod, but with a little swipe of gold paint, you get the look of the end connectors without any extra added work. And it also pays off in dividends, because it really, again, makes the model look just that much more completed and polished. Same is not just true for this one here, but if you're building a Tiger 1 or a King Tiger or anything along those lines, a little swipe of gold paint goes a long way. On this side here, you get to see the antenna base. The antenna base is very similar to the MP65 ones found on American vehicles, where the middle section here is actually rubber, and then we have the metal section on the top. So a little swipe of Tamiya rubber black was added on this section over here, and then the top portion is just painted with the same color of the remainder of the vehicle. Again, it's one of those things that commonly overlooked. People just either paint it all black or they leave it the color of the vehicle. And although if you can't leave it the color of the vehicle, it's not necessarily inaccurate, because these things tend to get overpainted and oversprayed. But if you want to just get a little bit of extra color pop on the build, just a little swipe of paint doesn't really hurt too much to do. Moving towards the front of the turret, you get to see the other periscopes right over here. These are, again, photo etch, and you have to be careful with the installation. Fortunately, the kit is very well illustrated with the molded in suggestion points, so the piece just line up very nicely, and once fit in place, again, do the part quite well. The only thing you have to do is a little swipe of gloss black here added to these areas in order to complete the look. Also in this section, we get to see the other two sections of clear plastic that were found on the model. One here is in the optic box right over here, and the other one's right over here in the corner. Both of these, again, are added after the paint work. On the box, this was just left off of the build, as we may have noticed before, which again allows me to pop the lens in place when the time comes. Then I can secure the thing to the model in this format. This is, again, the best way to prevent any sort of overspray from being placed on the lens. As for the one here built into the side of the turret, this one is really easily accessible through the bottom portion, so this is, again, something you could add at the very tail end of the build and not worry about accessibility. Briefly moving upward brings us to the AAMG, and the MG is a beautifully rendered part, a lot of sub-assemblies to it, and is extremely nicely detailed. The key is to know what part is MG and what part is cradle, because the cradle would be the same color of the vehicle, while the MG obviously wouldn't. And as you can see, the piece was actually painted separately. I had the cage and the receiver itself painted in two separate sub-assemblies, so this allowed the paint to get into the correct locations where it needed to go. Then final assembly was concluded, and this here is the end result. On the spade grips, I went ahead and painted them with that little swipe there of that whole red color that I always use to simulate Bakelite. It's definitely something that was seen on a lot of Russian MGs like the DSHK or the SG-43 come to mind, so a little swipe of paint over there definitely goes a long way. On the ammo cans, you'll see that I went ahead and painted them differently from the remainder of the vehicle. It's the same color that I painted on these little fellas over here on the sides. I'll get to in a second. And the ammo cans are, again, this is something you do have some creative licensing with. When it comes to Russian vehicles, the Russians have, just like Americans, a lot of different color variations of these parts, and you could have them either the same color of the vehicle, or you could, again, to get a little bit of extra color pop, render them in a slightly different color like I did here. And on that note, this takes us to the other ammo cans found here on the sides. I also rendered them with the ammo can color for the other units, just to give a little extra color pop to the vehicle. It also helps to break up the vehicle's color, and also, again, gives it just a little bit extra character. Moving to the mantlet, you get to see the tarpaulin here fitted in place. The tarpaulin, as I mentioned before, did need a little bit of sculpting in order to get the piece to properly fit on. This seems to be a recurring issue with these Trumpeter IS-7s, but on this one here I had no problems with the sculpting work, and everything just blended in quite nicely. The piece was carefully painted, weathered, and here's the final end result. Also, you get to see the numerous coax MGs. There's 3 on the IS-7. As the chieftain said, this thing's just bristling with MGs, and Patton would have absolutely loved it. So on all 3 of these MGs are mounted after the model is fully painted. This again allows the ability to thoroughly paint and weather everything separately without the risk of collateral damage. The top unit over here gets fit in place pretty easily. You have to remember that this little piece here is part of the tank, and it's not part of the MG, so paint that accordingly. And that went out really, again, without any sort of problems. The only ones that are a little trickier, these 2 little buggers over here, with how short and stubby the part is. Trying to get the piece to line up in that hole that's molded in the internal portion is a bit tricky, but it's not impossible. And as you can see, I was able to pull it off quite well. Armament, here you get to see what it looks like fully completed. Again, this one had the aftermarket unit fitted in place. The stock one is decent. You can assemble the stock one and have some good results with it, but the aftermarket one just is admittedly better compared to the stock plastic unit. The piece is nice and crisp. The detailing on it is excellent, and also the muzzle brake is definitely one of the piece's more shining lights. The plastic one is, again, workable, and you do have an option between the length of the muzzle brake, which is not really something found on the metal one over here, but the stock one can be revised. You can drill it out, like I mentioned, say, in the Luva video that I recently completed, the Term Hinton variant. And that one, again, similar type of setup as we have over here, and had some excellent results with it. But if you have a little bit extra cash in the budget to go ahead and spend, a nice replacement aftermarket piece like this one here, it's definitely something to check out. Again, the muzzle section is excellent, how it's all machined and drilled out. Also, you get to see that the seam is thoroughly blended in because this piece was a separate component as we saw before. And once everything is completed, it definitely looks like the real McCoy. Excellent, excellent bit of machinery and nice little bit of accessory to add to the build. The last thing to mention is with the shells. As we saw before, the aftermarket armament set not only gives you the replacement barrel, but it also gives you a full little spread here of the shells themselves. Shells are CNC brass, nicely detailed as I mentioned before, and so no point leaving them languish away in a spare bin, so I went ahead and painted them to give to the customer because, well, why not? The pieces are first primed with the flat black spray paint, and then I went ahead and painted them in the following format. The color that you see on them, it's the same Russian ammo can green that I used on the other sections that I already mentioned in this video. And then what I did was I carefully painted the bands. The bands are painted with a little swipe of gold paint, and to apply the paint, I went ahead and took the shell, carefully put it into the jaws in the lathe, and then I was able to add the paint in the two appropriate locations. The lathe really does a great job because it makes sure that the paint only gets applied to just the right location, and it gets applied in an even manner. Trying to do it freehand is a bit problematic, but with the lathe, it definitely does short work of it. And that's all there is for the detailing. This brings us directly to the paint work. For the paint work, it's done with the usual format, where before I go ahead and apply a single drop of paint to this thing, the model needs to be thoroughly primed. For primer, I roll with El Cheapo flat black spray paint. It does the job quite well. And then from there, the base coat gets applied via the airbrush. For the base coat, I went with the exterior latex paint that I have mixed on hand for Russian vehicles, and this was applied to all of the appropriate locations. After the application of the exterior latex, it then went ahead and got some filters. This would include some cream for the sun fading effects, and I also went ahead and added a diluted filter or a wash of Mission Model's drab, and that gave the model just a little bit of a drabby tint that hopefully comes out on camera. After the filter work was done, I then went ahead and added the remainder of the airbrush weathering, which would include some counter shading with some Tamiya diluted flat black. As I frequently mention, a lot of people out there, they like to counter shade before the model's painted, and I honestly hate that technique, where you paint the model black and then you go with light gray and scribble a bunch of scribble nonsense on it, then you apply the base coat with some translucent layers. I personally, again, absolutely hate that technique. It's just too problematic. It makes touching up really difficult. If you have to do a repair, good luck with that. There are way better ways to do it as opposed to that way. The way I like to do it is like the way I always do it on my builds, where I start with the model being opaque first, and then I go ahead and apply the filters and the other translucent effects afterwards. It's just a different way to do it, but the end results, again, are basically the same. After the airbrushing work was done, it was then time to go ahead and add the dry brushing effects. But before I do that, of course, the model gets thoroughly coated in the Tamiya the Tamiya black panel line accent. That stuff just loves to go into nice little nooks and crannies, like on the row wheels, the suspension on these tanks, absolutely. Engine deck, panels, it just really enhances the model and really does make it look excellent. Once that's out of the way, I then go ahead and add the chipping effects with the dry brushing method, as I've shown in the old tank repair videos. And by the way, in case anyone's wondering how exactly, or they want to see me apply the paint and weathering to these models, I recommend checking out the old tank repair videos. Trying to shove that information in one of these videos here would just make it way too long than it already is. So bear that in mind. As for the chipping, again, done via the dry brushing technique, and then after the dry brushing is done, it's then time to apply the markings. The markings are the kit's applied water slide decals, and no surprise here, they are excellent. They went out without any sort of problems, and once adhered to the model, and once the model was ready for it, the entire thing was coated with, you guessed it, none other than VMS matte varnish. Excellent product. I live and swear by that stuff. It's really the best stuff on the market if you're looking for a simple varnish to add to your builds. The varnish gets applied, It dries absolutely flat on the surface. As you can see, there's no drips or anything along those lines. It applies very smoothly via the airbrush, and it coats it very nicely. The varnish has that effect of making the decals nice and flat, where not only does it remove silvering or anything like that, but also makes it look like that the decal is essentially just painted on the surface, which again, excellent, excellent touch. The other thing that I like about the varnish is it gives the model that nice, complete glow look to it. It's one of those things, when you see it, you definitely appreciate it. It looks fantastic. After the varnish was added, it was then time to add on the clear plastic bits, like the lenses that I referenced before. But then, of course, went on the brush guards. And believe it or not, after the brush guards were fitted, the model did get a second surgical little shot of varnish applied to some special areas. And that has to do, again, with the brush guards. With the way these brush guards are, when you're fitting them in place, remember, the model's already finished, you will have an occasional little glue smear mark just where the thing makes contact with the model. It's inevitable. Also, when you have to carefully hand fit it, you may not fit right, and because of that, you may have a small little glue mark that would otherwise be something that would be detrimental to your build. However, one magic trick about the VMS matte varnish, specifically with super glue, is that once it applies, it completely makes the glue mark vanish. It disappears into the top coat. It's amazing. It's like disappearing ink. And this is only, of course, by the way, if the glue is as flat as possible to the surface. You have a bump on the surface, obviously it's going to cause issues. But if the thing is just a little smear or something, and it's not a big problem, the varnish, once applied, just makes it vanish. So how is the varnish applied? Well, very carefully with the airbrush. I have to go ahead and get the angle just right so that I'm able to hit the area in question without having any sort of collateral damage being the lenses. And obviously I was able to pull it off because if I didn't mention it, you would have never guessed or realized. Of course, it would be video malpractice to constantly be referencing the other IS-7 build throughout the entirety of this video and not having it make its nice little cameo appearance. So without further ado, here you can see the subject matter of this video in the foreground with the subject matter of the previous video in the background. Obviously, everything that went into that build was mentioned in far depth in the dedicated model showcase video I have for that particular model, which of course can be found in the video description. Regardless, it still looks really cool having both of these examples lined up side by side right here on the filming table. In the end, there's really nothing much more I could have anticipated out of this build that I didn't get from the previous one. In fact, it was basically just deja vu. Although, because this was my second time around, I will say this build probably went by a little bit smoother compared to the previous one because, well, when you do things the second time around, you tend to be a little bit better at it. The build itself, be it from a first time around or the second time around, still goes by very smoothly, and these Trumpeter kits are just very nicely engineered in that regard. Hopefully the customer enjoys this model as much as I enjoyed building it, but enough said about that. Let's go ahead and go directly into skill level and recommendations. This I'm going to go over pretty light because, again, this is not the first time that I built one of these models, so I'm just going to give it, again, the 6,000 foot view. If you are a beginner, this is definitely not going to be a beginner-friendly model. This, again, is a solid, in my opinion, intermediate level type kit. This is a type of kit where if you've done about 10 or 15 builds already and you have your fundamentals ironed out and you're just basically coasting at that point, then this build here becomes a viable option. Although if you are an intermediate builder, this is a great addition to add because it gives you and introduces you to photo etch without having it be overly complex, as we see on several other more advanced kits. There's a lot of advanced kits out there where they just give you tons and tons of frets of photo etch, and if you've never worked with this material before, it can be a bit overwhelming. Well, with this one over here, you're essentially putting your toe into the water, where you get to handle very simple photo etch, but you get to learn how to cut it off with the sprue, deburr, fit in place, the type of adhesives to use, and you basically build your skill sets around that. And this kit here is a good choice for that. Needless to say, if an intermediate could build one of these models pretty easily, an advanced builder will have an absolute breeze throwing one of these up. These are an excellent build for an advanced builder, where even though it's not exactly that of a challenging build, it's still one that's nicely engineered, nicely detailed, and goes together very well. And in the end, it's just going to be a very pleasant building experience, and it's also going to be a nice, cool, interesting vehicle to have to your collection. Obviously, as we saw in this video, there are some aftermarket accessories out there to hop one of these things up further. I obviously went ahead and replaced the main armament as well as with the track, but I'm pretty sure I'm just scratching the surface, and I wouldn't be surprised that there are other sets out there that are used to enhance this kit even further. Is this something that's mandatory? Well, usually this is best left up to discretion of the builder. However, I will say with the caveat that you replace the tracks. And this is extending back to what I said before about the tank being an intermediate build, and for the advanced builder, I don't care how proficient you are with individual Lincoln Line tracks. Those tracks are garbage, and the replacement of the tracks with these metal workable ones here, in my opinion, is not an accessory. It is mandatory. These tracks with this kit here are a match made in heaven. They really just make the model just go together so much more easily, so much more quickly, and the end result blows the kit tracks out of the water all day long. Trust me, I cannot harp this enough. The workable track-link accessory is not an option. It is a mandatory bit of equipment in order to get one of these built up and built up to its full potential. As I stated earlier, get these tracks and you will most certainly thank me. And yes, I will say that if push came to shove, I'd rather have the kit with the stock barrel and the aftermarket tracks as opposed to the other way around. And that's all there is to say about skill level, which tiptoes us directly into recommendations. Just like I mentioned in the other video, covering the basics, if you are a fan of Russian armor, World War II Russian armor, Cold War armor, paper panzers, experimental tanks, this kit here is going to be an absolute mandatory addition to have to your collection. If you're a fan of the MMO tank games out there, this is a very popular vehicle from what I was told in those video games, and if that's you and you have the skill sets required to put one of these together, this is definitely something that you would be foolish to overlook. Briefly hopping back to what I mentioned before, if you're a fan of the Joseph Stalin tank family and you have interest in the Joseph Stalin 1 all the way up to the T10, obviously you need the 7 here to complete the roster. And fortunately, these kits here, as well as the other ones that I just mentioned, are very prolific on the market, and the quality on this kit here is also going to be excellent. Definitely, you cannot go wrong with adding this kit to your stash, let alone collection, once it's fully built, of course. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this 1/35th scale Soviet IS-7 heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being 1/35th scale model showcase videos like this one over here, or the other type of content being larger scale project update videos that frequently get posted. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as photographs of the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been seen on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. See you there.